I call this falling, and that will become apparent as we move through the gears. When I set out to do this audio cast for my own personal reasoning, trying to understand a bit about my life story and the notes, the songs, the diaries that I've created through the years, I didn't expect this part to be so hard. Wood for the Tree. It's the first proper song that I wrote and brought to life. So I thought that was a good place to kind of start. All the parts are connected, we're all connected, but the chapters, the background, the backstory, the connections that I'm trying to piece together, I thought would be beautifully chronological. I could start here, I could finish here, and I could go, yeah, that's a good picture. And I can, to a certain point, but there are parts of that, having looked at the notes and some of the books already, and there are, it's a bigger task than I ever thought, but I'm relishing it already. To the point that I needed to take stock quickly. And I realised that before I could move forward, I have to go back. And that was a natural decision that I arrived at without even having to make that decision. Because I look back through the years chronologically, whilst I scribbled notes down through some of the earlier years, the 1989s, the 1990s, through the really life-defining points at that time. I never fully put anything into a context until 92, 93, 94 and recorded some songs. But the actual words that I spoke back then hit hard, and I realised I had to go to a place maybe I didn't want to. And as hard as it is, then before I can move forward, I have to look at that part and I suppose close part of it out for my own peace of mind. Because I wrote everything down for a purpose. I didn't know what that purpose was at the time. So I went back to Wood for the Tree because I wrote it when I was 21, 1992. A few years, really, after we started losing friends around us. And I didn't sit down with the intention of writing about grief. I didn't even know that's what I was doing. I just found myself at that point writing about a tree. For those of you that were there, you'll know the feeling possibly that I'm trying to describe, even if you never stood under the same branches I was imagining or standing under at times. The pull, the place, the real awe in your head that you kept returning to without actually deciding to. It wasn't a grave, it wasn't a shrine, it was somewhere that just held the weight without complaining about it. That's what the tree was for me. I called it mercy because that's what it felt like, not a choice, not a comfort I went looking for. It was simply something I was subject to. And if you were part of those years, 1989, 1990, 1991, the years that we don't always talk about directly even now, then you'll know that grief at that age doesn't announce itself cleanly. It doesn't give you any language, any warning. You're just suddenly somewhere you didn't need to be, want to be, mean to be, beneath something bigger than you, and you were just left wondering how you got there. That's how I felt. For those of you who weren't part of that specific time, maybe you had your own version of it. Different years, different names, different geography, but the same mathematics, too young, too soon, and too many in a lot of cases. You'll understand that part. Sometimes I went to the tree because I thought it needed me, but remembering felt like an act of service, maybe. If I stopped, something would be lost and wouldn't be recovered, and it's not how it was. And sometimes, if I'm honest, I look at that part I buried in the middle of the song. Sometimes it was entirely the other way around, and I was the one that was falling apart. I was the one that needed somebody to go when the noise around became too loud. Sounds like a counselling session with myself. And here's the thing I eventually admitted that, and only in the later verses of the song, it wasn't the world around that was too loud. It was my head that was too loud, and everything that was inside and going on. It feels like a much harder thing to say at 21 than it sounds now. There's a line in the chorus that I wrote about radiance, about clouds parting, light coming through, and the people on the hillside below not being able to see it because it was my vision, my view. What I was trying to describe was the isolation that comes with my loss at that point. The way that grief puts you somewhere that other people, even people who love you, can't follow, can't understand, can't know. They do, I think, in their own way, but you don't feel that at the time. And yet, And this bit matters. There was a radiance, genuinely. The clouds did part sometimes. There was hope. There was a moment of, I don't know what the word is. There were moments up there with the tree, with the memory, with everything I was carrying, when something broke through that I can only call a moment to breathe, for want of a better word. Every time I went there, I had an idea of why I needed to be there. And every time I came out, it was something had changed. I ended the song by going back to the beginning, because that's the truth of it. It doesn't actually end. It returns. It comes back around. The same feeling, the same tree, but I think I was different. I was in a different place each time I got there, to my anchor, to my go-to. The grief doesn't change. The grief doesn't resolve, and that just changes shape, if that makes sense. And you learn slowly to live inside the shape that it's making. For those of you that were there with me in those years, thank you for still being here. And for those of you that weren't, but know exactly what I'm talking about, I think you'll understand the tree and the significance of your own version of the tree. But that was me. That was my, having looked back at the song, that's why I wanted to kind of bring this together to a, this is what happened, this is why. And that feeds very closely into where I go now. I suppose to a place I didn't want to go to, but I need to go to. And that's a few years before the wood for the tree, because for a lot of us, and I can't speak for everybody, I don't intend to, and I don't want to. This is my take on what I saw, what I felt back then. And I was going through some old notes, and I found a selection of lyrics that I wrote probably around 1991, 92, and this came out of everything that we'd been through. I wrote it as an acoustic song, and it helped me convey my feelings into some kind of structure at the time. And I called it Once Upon a Life. It went on to the second cassette. And there are songs that you write for an audience, and there are songs that you write, or poems that you write, because you have no choice. And Once Upon a Life was the second kind. I was 18. In a relatively short period of time, our group of friends had experienced something that none of us had any real preparation for: the loss of people our own age. Friends that we had grown up with, grown alongside, laughed with, shared joyful early years. People who were supposed to be there in the way that you simply assume, or, well, at 18, that everyone around you will continue to be there, and then they weren't. I didn't have the language for grief then. I'm not sure any of us did. What I had was a diary and eventually a guitar, and their song Once Upon a Life came from those notes I'd been keeping, fragments of feeling more than finished thoughts. What struck me now, looking back at those pages of scribbles, was how much of the writing was really just a series of questions I couldn't actually answer. Why was the world suddenly upside down? How much could we take before something broke? Why had they been taken away from us? I wasn't looking for kind of any resolution. I was just trying to locate myself inside an experience that felt completely disorientating. Writing was how I did it, and it still is. What I didn't expect was how quickly the song itself stopped being about that one experience that triggered that writing, and it started absorbing all of the losses that we all went through. And each time something happened, each time the ground shifted again, the song was there for me, taking it all in. The same questions, the same feeling of emptiness. That's what it reflected in my own views. And by the time I'd actually finished it, it became a vessel for everything that we'd been through in those early years. The song title came last, as song titles sometimes do. Initially it was just an outpouring of notes and scribbles and thoughts and chaos, but then it gradually became the song that I wrote. And we go here to one of the few versions I ever recorded of it. Once Upon a Life. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was not a story with a safe distance built into it. It was just a reflection of a life and lives that had existed, had mattered so much, and then were gone. So I'd go back to an early version because this is where it started. This is my recording of it before it becomes its later variation. Let's hear the song.
Many years ago, since old man town, we knew the paths to tread to help us find our ground. And now at times it feels like it's all just flipped around. We're all spinning quietly, unable to make sound. And they say that only the good die young. Please help me through this now. Help me overcome the pain and frustrated feeling of another light that's gone, never to shine again. An energy moved on.
So that's where the original song came from. It was my questions, I suppose, I wanted answering. Most of the friends we lost were taken away very suddenly, without warning, without logic, without any of the fairness that you might expect life to follow. It was 16, 17, 18, 19. Gloriously innocent, young. You burst into the world and it's there for you. That's what stays in me even now. Not the how, just the age of it, the quality of being exactly that young. I remember that feeling to a point. And if I did remember every part of me without the need for notes, and I wouldn't be where I am now doing this. But the world was wide open and everything was still ahead of you. And the people left behind, the ones that are still here, they're still carrying the weight, they would tell you that everything can and has changed in an instant. No warning, no fairness, no narrative logic that you'd expect or hope that life might follow. And what gathered alongside that grief slowly, quietly, was this awareness that none of us are as permanent as we feel. And that's where the line, none of us are safe from Mother Earth, crept in to my writing, because that's how I felt at the time. The emptiness of it, the who's next? The laughter that was physical, the kind of laughter that literally put you on the floor, the way we were so completely ourselves with each other without any real awareness of how rare that was. The sudden bewildering absence where a person used to be, sitting next to us, always there, integrated with our life as you don't even question it at the time. I wrote all those verses for myself, but hopefully for everybody. For those that weren't there, for those that are young now, perhaps recognise something of themselves in that picture I'm painting of age, that feeling, that freedom. I would never, and I'm hoping it comes across, that I would never ask anybody to be afraid of life at that point. Fear is not the lesson, and it's not something I'd want to pass on within talking to my own kids, without hopefully hearing something a bit quieter than that. Just a kind of awareness, I suppose. A gentle, ongoing remembrance of the people around you, the ones you're laughing with, the ones you could count on at any time in your life, the ones that you grow with. They're everything. The song ends with "We will find the way." Not that we found it, not we survived and this is what we learned. It's just an intention. I hope my children, anybody young enough to still be at the beginning of their life, beginning of their journey, that they find a way with everybody alongside them. People will move apart, lives will move apart, we know that. But sometimes reconnections are there. A phone call, a message, a text. There are reconnections throughout your life. I hope that they get to keep the people they love around them still as you grow. That the losses, when they come later, gently and after a long, full life. That's why I couldn't say at 18. And this is what the song is trying to say, I suppose, all along. To the friends we've lost, you're still within these words. You always will be. To the friends who remained, who lived through the years alongside me, this was always as much your song as it is mine. Once upon a life is all I can say. But that life and those lives were everything. I didn't call this chapter Once Upon a Life because whilst it feels the chapter is about that song, it was more than Once Upon a Life and still is. So I called it Falling. That's the word that I chose to sum the song up. The story and everything in between in one single word, falling. It's the word that the song kept coming back to. Every time I reached the chorus, every time the verses had done their work, I was trying to make sense of something that made no sense. That's where I landed, falling. Or rather, that's where I didn't land, because falling isn't landing. And that's the whole point. What we went through together, individually, all those years ago, wasn't a single moment of impact. It's an ongoing, quiet loss of ground beneath our feet. One by one, things shifted. And people that we assumed would always be there weren't. None of us had a map for that. None of us had any map of where to take it. I still don't. I'm trying desperately not to let emotion take this, because this was never about that. But it hurts now, 35 years on. When you revisit, we were 18, we were supposed to be at the beginning of everything, not learning what it felt like to lose people that we loved at that age. So we fell. So we fell together, in a way, even at times when it felt completely solitary. But that's why the word feels right to me all these years later. Falling isn't finished, it isn't final. When I listen back to the song now, and I will play out with a version that I've created now, using my own vocal lines, I wanted it to be personal, and I wanted it to take not just AI and the song creation, I wanted to give it that extra weight. It's a very rough acoustic song that I have very limited copy of, but that holds a place that will never change. That's my moment back then. But I want to bring it to the fore now with a different approach that retains its feel, its spirit, its love, its life, and just gives it longevity. I digress, but when I listen back to the song, when I read the words that I scrawled in those diaries all those years ago, before any of us knew how to talk about any of this stuff, what I hear isn't defeat. I hear somebody, all of us, I suppose, that are somewhere between the loss and the ground, still reaching. Does it make sense? Without quite knowing what we're reaching for. But that's what the word holds for me, falling. The grief, yes, the laughter, the friendship, the bond, the closeness, all of that. Our connections were also strong. The people we lost along the way, we will never, ever forget. We will never stop carrying in our hearts. We all fell back then. I think part of me always will fall. At times, I think I've ever stopped. But looking back, we all fell together. We all grew stronger together out of the darkness. Bonds now that we have remain unbroken. And that, in a way, closes part of that, I suppose, because whilst you'd give everything to have them back here, from the life we have now, that isn't possible. But they hold us close today. They're still around us, I believe. They're still part of our lives in so many ways. We don't always know it at the time, but they're part of the reason our friendships today remain, because of what we went through. And in a heartbeat, you would change it to have it all back. But life's not like that. So we'll play out as we did with Wood for the Tree, with a version of this song that holds a special place in my heart now, as did the original, and what this has now become. And I'll make sense of that later. So I go back to the newer versions. I've only ever recorded the original, and then I've now used my own old vocal lines. I've resampled some of my vocals from previous songs. As I said before, I want AI to bring tools to pull certain parts of these tracks together, which I never could. I want to keep it simple. I want to keep it retaining its original feel, I don't want it to be a full-blown West End production and a full orchestra, and I just want it to have its simplicity and its beauty and its heart that I wanted and created in my head through writing these so many years ago and recording them so many years ago. And they'll only ever be what they were back then, and my newer versions will be a new take on that, a breath of something different, if that makes sense. So I've resampled vocal lines, so I've taken parts of me here, which are quite, well, they needed tuning. And I did lots of na-na-nas. Used to love my na-na-nas. Okay, it wobbles, but it retained a piece of me. And then I went back to a few other parts that I've laid down recently, or not so recently, a few years. So as rough as it sounds, I can then utilise that. I can pull that into the systems now that will reanalyze those lyrics, that style, and then it would take my vocals, it will add that in. And this was a song I did called Burst. So it's nothing too hectic, nothing particularly groundbreaking. Some of it's higher than I probably can do now. This was a couple of years ago. Some of these parts, some of these were a lot bit further afield. But I've used that now to give me the vocal structure, to give me the resampling for using in the song. And then now this becomes a slightly fuller song with some different detailing, and I want to retain part of that track for me and what I intended it to be all those years ago. So this is one of the tracks that I will now play out with, Once Upon a Life 2026, the newer version, a version that has taken it in a different direction to an extent, but retained what I hope and feel is its heart of the song. Thank you for being part of this journey. I'm sorry if this has been a heavier episode than I was expecting. Much heavier. But I hope this now leads to a place where I can look at some of the lighter tracks and notes and scribbles and pull something from that, from the place we were. Never forgotten. But we move forward, we move on. And I hope that that's reflected in some of the lighter views on life later. I suppose that's what I'm trying to find out, where I was at the time and what led me to that, and piece together a viewpoint of me. So we'll see. Anyway, I digress. Thank you for being part of this. This is Once Upon a Life 2026.
There are times when the world feels like it's upside down. Times when the world makes you frown. Times when everything gets weird about a day. How long can we carry on before we stop to say? We carry along, yet we don't know why. 1 minute so happy, the next you wanna cry. And just how much can we all take before we cross the line and something breaks? Falling again. Like I'm falling again. years ago, things were so mapped out. We knew the paths to tread to help us find our ground. And now at times it feels like it's all just flipped around, and we're all spinning quietly, unable to make sound. And they say that only the good die young. Please help me through this now, and help me overcome the pain and frustrated feeling of another life that's gone, never to shine again. And energy now moved on, falling again. Feels like I'm falling again. Why have they been taken away from here, with so much left to learn, so close, so very near? It shows that none of us are safe from Mother Earth, an undisclosed time limit from the very point of birth. Falling again. Feels like I'm falling again, falling again. I'm falling again. We will never forget the good times that we shared.
So that's where we are today,
Unexpected
with a
moments.
revised, revisited version of Once Upon a Life. Thank you for being part of the journey. As always, loving having you along, because there are parts of my life that are connected to yours and vice versa. And if this is making you smile, bringing back some memories, as painful as they may be, I'm sorry for that. And chapter 3 will hopefully be a bit lighter. Because this has been a tough one, very tough. And it would be, it was necessary. Thank you again, and see you in chapter 3.
Just how much you mean, we will never forget. All our memories and